A few people in the waiting area had already noticed her before she even reached the interview room. Not because she looked confident or impressive. It was the opposite. Her dress was stained with mud. One sleeve had a small tear near the wrist. Her shoes were worn down at the edges, and the canvas bag hanging from her shoulder looked like it had survived years of hard use. Someone whispered. Another person chuckled. By the time the young woman stepped into the civil service interview hall, several candidates had already decided she didn't belong there. If you believe in kindness and second chances, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. The young woman's name was Talia Mercer. She was 26 and had traveled nearly 12 hours by bus from a small mountain town called Briar Creek. The weather had turned terrible that morning. Heavy rain flooded part of the highway, and one of the buses broke down. Talia spent almost an hour helping an elderly passenger, whose oxygen tank had fallen during the confusion. By the time she reached the city, she was soaked, exhausted, and late. She barely had enough money for the trip. For 3 years, Talia had worked at a public library while studying at night. Her father had suffered a stroke 2 years earlier, leaving him unable to work. Her younger brother was attending community college. Most of the household bills landed on her shoulders. The civil service examination had taken her 2 attempts to pass. This interview was her final step. Inside the interview room sat 5 panel members. They had already interviewed candidates since early morning. Most arrived wearing expensive suits and carrying polished folders. Talia entered holding her documents tightly against her chest. One panel member glanced at the mud stains and exchanged a quick look with another. The chairman, Harold Vance, noticed it too. "Long journey?" he asked. Talia gave a small nod. "Very long, sir." There was a brief silence. The interview began normally. Questions about public administration, local government budgets, community programs, and emergency planning followed one after another. Talia answered calmly, not perfectly, once she paused to gather her thoughts. Another time she admitted she didn't know the exact figure being asked. But unlike some candidates who tried to sound smarter than they were, she spoke honestly. The panel continued. Then one member, Rebecca Lynn, asked a question she often used near the end of interviews. If you were responsible for distributing emergency aid after a natural disaster and resources were limited, how would you decide who receives help first? It was a difficult question. Many candidates earlier that day had answered with technical terms, policy language, and complicated priority charts. Talia looked down for a moment. Then she answered, "When my father had his stroke, we lived in a town where the nearest ambulance took 40 minutes to arrive." The room grew quiet. She continued, "That day taught me something. The people who need help most aren't always the people who speak the loudest. Sometimes they're the ones sitting quietly because they've already lost hope of being noticed." No one interrupted. Talia wasn't reading from a textbook anymore. "I would start with facts and data because they matter. But I would also make sure someone actually walks through the community and talks to people. Numbers can tell you where the damage is. They can't always tell you who has been forgotten." One panel member slowly lowered his pen. Talia took a breath. Public service isn't only about managing resources. It's about paying attention. Sometimes the biggest mistake isn't helping the wrong person. It's failing to see the person who needed help in the first place. The room became completely still. Nobody laughed. Nobody wrote anything. For several seconds, the interview panel simply sat there. Not because the answer was dramatic, because it sounded real. Harold Vance finally thanked her for her time. Talia collected her papers and left. Outside the building, she passed the same waiting area where some candidates had laughed earlier. Most avoided eye contact. She didn't think much about it. She was already worried about catching the last evening bus home. 3 weeks later, an email arrived while she was shelving books at the library. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. She had been selected, not at the top of the ranking list. Not because of special treatment. She had simply earned her place. Months later, during training, Harold Vance happened to visit one of the sessions. During a break, he recognized her. He smiled and said, "Your answer stayed with the panel longer than you probably realize." Talia laughed softly. I was just telling the truth, and maybe that was exactly why they remembered it. Comment: kindness still exists if you believe even one good act can change someone's life. If this story touched your heart, please leave a like and share it with someone who still believes kindness matters. The best public servants are not always the most polished people in the room. Sometimes they are the ones who have struggled enough to notice the struggles of others. And often, the ability to see people clearly is worth more than any perfect answer.